You're listening to another episode of Just a Couple of Jerks with Paul Winstanley and another regular person from the IT community. Thanks ever so much for all the great feedback I've been getting on these podcasts so far. And, subscribe, check it out, keep coming back. We've got some really good guests coming up. We're moving into different IT community spaces. This week we have Sam Aaron, who may be known for the Raspberry Pi community for his Sonic Pi application, which he now focuses on Windows and Mac OS. We're also going to be delving into the Azure space soon, but also more people from the Raspberry Pi community as well. I'm having a real blast doing these. I hope you are as well listening to them. As I say, this week is Sam Aaron. We chatted for a good amount of time about how COVID-19 is impacting him, but also into the history of Sonic Pi and how he got into IT in the first place. And we found out we had a connection by both going to university up in the northeast of England. Take a listen to this week's Just a Couple of Jerks.
It just reset, I think.
Yeah, okay, so we're off. Okay, so I'm recording, but we'll just kind of ease into it. So, Sam, Aaron, welcome to my new podcast, Just a Couple of Jerks.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today because we've known each other for quite a while in the community, but we've never actually met. We've never actually spoken.
That's the first time, indeed.
Yeah. But I feel as if I know you, and hopefully we'll get to know each other more through this discussion today.
Yeah, and I mean, from my perspective, you've been extremely helpful in the work I do, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. We talked yesterday. We talked about I created a new portable release for your Sonic Pi application or project or music. What do you call it, Sonic Pi? It's a
gift.
it's
It's a gift to everybody, to the world. Yeah. I mean, you could call it depends on what kind of person you are. It's a product. It's not really a product. It's a software application. It's not really. It's also an expression tool for humans. It's just a fun piece of software that you can use to turn code into music, which you can use to teach people how to code, but also use for yourself to express yourself.
Yeah, and it's something that you can ease into with no experience of music whatsoever, and no experience of coding as well, can't you? You can just pick it up and learn through the tutorials that you have in the application itself.
Yes, I mean, it was designed initially as a response to the UK government coming out with a computer science curriculum, and schools are sort of panicking in many ways, and they still are actually. But initially, they were really panicking. How do we engage children with this new computer science curriculum, which focuses not just on how to use computers, but how to actually program them? And so my thought was to combine my existing experience and excitement about coding music and see if I could do something with educators and find something that's simple that you can use the basics of music making, which I think everyone really pretty much enjoys, and combine them with the basics of programming.
Yes, and when I first experienced it, or first experienced teaching people how to use it at some Raspberry Jams, my focus was on kids who were about 8 and above, going through through to teenagers, and saying to them, you don't need to have experience of music, you don't need to have experience of coding. We can just sit down and we can produce something very simple, very quickly. And do you know what? I used to absolutely love doing this, and the response on the child's face when they just did something simple, play the simple command. It's a play and then a number, isn't it? Play, or you can use
Yes.
a note, and just by saying something simple like play 80, and they run that, and a noise would come out of the computer, and the joy on their face was immense. I used to love seeing the kids and their response to it. So I can imagine for you, and this I'd be kind of doing it one to one, or two or three people lined up and having a go. And I can imagine the response or what you get from that is huge because you have this all over the world.
Yes, I mean that's the lovely thing is that you can use Sonic Pi to do what you describe, which is to have the first experience of programming, and that's not just in schools, but I've heard of code sort of onboarding code academies using it to train existing professionals in other fields into programming, so it's adults as well, and grandparents. There's a whole community of elderly people using it. But it's not just about getting people started with programming. I've also developed the tools so that it's also useful for professional musicians as well, who can use it to make new kinds of productions, to do kinds of performances that aren't possible with existing technologies. And so to see the whole range, not just the initial experiences you described so beautifully, but also to see these amazing end results that real fabulous artists are coming up with is just it's a beautiful experience in its entirety.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of these things on YouTube. It's amazing the stuff that people do with it. And now you do you've got your own little band as well. Is it your friend of yours? Is it Ben?
Yeah, Ben was a guitarist I worked with. He was a peripatetic. Well, he's a professional guitarist. One of his many things is as a peripatetic teacher in schools, so he's teaching guitar lessons. And his school was one of the schools we worked in with a project a number of years ago, where we engaged with both the computing science teacher and the music teacher, and we brought in external artists to come in and find ways to engage children with code, creative code. And Ben was one of the people we worked with because he was at the school, and we made friends, and we've been playing together ever since in various places. And yeah, so it's really nice to use Sonic Pi not just a tool to make my own crazy electronic dance music, but also to find ways to combine it with existing traditional instruments such as guitars. So working with Ben has allowed me to really focus on doing things like converting code into a guitar effects pedal, where with a couple of lines of code, I can make a reverb effects pedal, which normally is like £100. It's 3 lines of free code, or echo pedal, or a distortion pedal, or flanger, and all these different kinds of things. And then to figure out how I can make Sonic Pi into a tool that allows me to live code those effects whilst Ben is playing. So Ben is playing his guitar, and I'm able to change the lines of code and affect the sound of his guitar in real time, which is huge fun.
So is that the process then that you have for creating these kind of the effects that you've got in Sonic Pi? Is it purely mimicking the sound, or is there a science to it?
I don't, yeah, science is a funny word, isn't it? You know, like all
Mm.
science is based around hypothesis, which itself is based around a guess, which is a very sort of artistic process in itself. Um, for me, the process of working on and developing Sonic Pi is really around serendipity. So finding interesting situations that demand new responses, new ideas, new thoughts. So that's typically from collaboration. So collaborating with Ben, I would say to Ben, what is it you need? What is it it doesn't do? What are the things that are frictionful that we can improve? And using those kinds of conversations then to drive the to-do list of the development, and obviously then filtering it with the things which are feasible, with the things which aren't feasible, and of those feasible things, which are the things are I can add early on to the roadmap to not only build it but then to test it thoroughly with the end user really, and all the way through to Sonic Pi's development, it has been built directly with the end user, not just in mind, but in direct collaboration. So initially, that was the school children using it in the classrooms. More recently, it's with musicians of various of types. But I never really blue sky research and then ivory tower build and then hope that it's going to be useful. I always work directly with people, and if things aren't directly useful, I don't put it in. And then also, it's a really important point to point out that any feature that I consider that I develop, if at the final point of it working and doing what we need, it doesn't seem simple enough to teach to a 10-year-old child, I remove it straight away and then rethink it through. So everything has to be useful to an end user and also simple enough to teach to a 10-year-old child. And that actually turns out to be pretty tough. And so lots of ideas don't get through to the final product, but the ones that do turn out to be really fun and simple and powerful in terms of expression in ways that I hadn't imagined before.
I think that's great actually, because ultimately, um, for anything that I try and implement as well in IT, I always focus around the keep it simple approach. Um, because if this can't be fathomed out by someone down the line, and in your case, it's a 10-year-old child being able to do this, then it's a mockery of what you do ultimately. It's something that someone can't use correctly. So it's great that you factor that in. I mean, does it a lot of things get cold because of that, or rethought? Is it
Yeah,
percentage
I
wise?
mean,
Can
it
you?
is really hard to make things that simple. And then people come to me and say, well, of course, Sam, you can do it with your system because it's just a simple music making piece of software, and we couldn't possibly do it with our banking transaction service or our highly scalable doodah, what's it? And which I reply to them really. Sonic Pi is not just a tool for making music. It's a highly reactive, concurrent, as in many threads working at the same time, system that has a strong sense of timing, which a lot of systems don't have, and a high sense of determinism, so that the race conditions and always run the same races the same way, which means the same code always produces the same music ultimately, regardless of multiple threads and race conditions. And we have a tuple space like state management system, which is also deterministic and safe across multiple threads. We have ability to talk across machines using networking protocols. And all of this is 10-year-old ready, in my opinion. So if your system is more complicated than that, then perhaps not, but many systems aren't. So I think really it's a matter of how much effort are you prepared to put into that thought process and design process to make it simple. And I think actually a lot of people stop far too early. And the result is a lot of technical debt, a lot of unmaintainable code, a lot of systems which are hard to untangle and to work forwards and ultimately costs a company, if it's a company piece of software, a lot of money and time that could have been better sort of invested in the early stages of the product.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And you're working with multiple people as well on the project. Obviously, you're the main person here, but you allow other contributors, other people to tweak things. I suppose the ultimate approval comes from yourself.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot. It's an open source project, and obviously there are many ways in which you could manage such a project. And the approach I take is to be very liberal with allowing people to put commits in and to accept them. But ultimately, I merge all the commits. It's kind of like a Linus Torvalds style approach, mainly because I want to make sure that I keep on top of what's going on and I understand everything that goes into the system. Because ultimately, even though person X might develop a really, really cool feature, if that's something that I don't understand sufficiently, that I can then maintain that feature when person X disappears, as often they do, because people don't stay around forever, and I'm not paying them, so why would they? Um, then it would be a bad thing to have that in a system when I can't maintain it. So I have to make sure that I can understand everything, which possibly may not be the most reliable way of getting all the best features through, but for me, it increases my sustainability in the long run.
No, absolutely. There's nothing worse than sort of going back to it and going, what is all this? And then it's integrated into the products. You've got no idea how to untangle that, and you've got no way of contacting someone. Like you say, they may have dropped off the project at that point, and trying to sort of unpick that and get it working, or understand it. Keeping
Yeah, I
that
mean
on your
that
side
happened in the
helps.
early days with the Windows port because right at the beginning, I architected Sonic Pi so that it would be possible. I hoped it would be possible to port it to other platforms. The first platform I worked on was the Raspberry Pi. But I had in mind that the Raspberry Pi's goal as a charity, who are funding the original work, is to lower the barrier of entry for everybody, really. And it's not really Raspberry Pi specific. It's to get children engaged in coding. And so to me, part of that mission is if a child already has a PC or a Mac, is to allow them to use that directly and not require them to have to buy new hardware. And so I architected the system in such a way that other platforms could be supported. And eventually, because it was much easier, I mean, I did all the original development on a Raspberry Pi 1, which was painful, but allowed me to make sure that the product actually ran. Because I had heard of so many people who developed a project targeting the Raspberry Pi 1 on their fast PCs or fast Macs, and it all worked beautifully on their machines there. And when they ported it across to run on the hardware, which obviously much lower spec, it just didn't work at all. So it made sense to me to develop it on the hardware that it was targeted for, to ensure from day one it worked. But then obviously at some point it became much easier to do the development and compiling of a C++ app on a faster CPU. So, and because I was using a Mac at the time, I ported it to my Mac so I could develop it concurrently. And then a really really kind contributor um, put all the effort in really himself to port it to the PC and share the results with me, and that was fabulous. And so we released a few versions of Sonic Pi for PC using his build process. And then one day he disappeared, which is completely understandable because I was saying before, it's an open source project. And so then I was like, oh, I would really like to continue to develop for the PC, but I'm not a PC developer. I don't really have a PC. I don't know how this build process works. This Visual Studio, blah, 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 is all jargon words to me. So that was really left me like, okay, I need to make sure from now on I understand all the things going forwards. And obviously I put all the effort into, because it was really important to support the PC, I put all the effort into learning all those things. And now I manage and develop the build.
Then you're now a Wix specialist because of it. That's the tool you're using? Yeah.
Actually, that was the guy, the original guy suggested and built original things for that. So I mean, a lot of and actually the recent builds of Sonic Pi have been massively improved by another contributor, um, Chris Morhan, who has put a lot of effort into making automating more of the build. So actually, a lot of the Windows process has come directly from others, but I've spent the time to look at it and understand it and get myself in a position where I can myself do that work, which is really important.
Yeah, and I know I was going to mention it earlier. You said to me yesterday, you were quite happy to take on board the portable work as well, and maybe that's something we can go through and I could teach you how to do it. But I'm happy doing it for now. I'm around for a while. I enjoy standing up these portable releases. It's good fun, and
Super kind of you, thank you.
happy to keep doing it.
Yeah, and
So
it just means that more people can use Sonic Pi, the people who don't have access to the ability to run and install on the machine, which is great.
yeah, it does open it up, and we've had a few head banging moments recently with that. But yeah, we get there with it eventually. Um, yeah, so Sonic Pi itself. Then you mentioned the beginnings of that. How did that all kick off? Then was it the foundation came to you, or
So I
vice
was
versa?
working as a researcher at the University of Cambridge Computer Laboratory, and my main principal interest was in building software systems that allowed you to convert code to music. So programming languages specifically for the creation of music. And I was working on a system built in a language called Clojure, called Overtone, which is a Lisp environment running on the JVM, using a system called Super Collider, which is a really fabulous open source audio synthesis engine, and combining those two. And that was my principal interest. And I was working on that and enjoying that. And then at that time, that was the Raspberry Pi span out of the computer labs at Cambridge. And obviously, they were way more successful than they imagined they were going to be. And these computers were flying off the shelves and magnitudes people hadn't imagined. And then suddenly they were like, how do we actually meet our charitable objective, which is to get children programming? Because although we've got this very affordable hardware, there really aren't that many existing educational software apps which will run on the Raspberry Pi 1 at the time. And so that was an open challenge. And it was the Broadcom Foundation, so Broadcom make the chips for the Raspberry Pi, who had an initial budget for a 3 month sort of little guerrilla project to go and have a go at seeing if we could build something for kids. And I think this passed around the labs, and anyone saying, does anyone know anyone who could possibly work on that? And it eventually came onto my desk, and someone said, do you think you might be able to do something with this? And I was like, sure, I can probably figure out a way to simplify my existing live coding system in a way that could be simple enough for children. And my past, I mean, my PhD was in language design and of something called domain-specific languages. So these are mini languages specifically designed for a specific. I'm using the word specific a lot there. Specifically designed for specific use cases. So using the language of the domain. So I'd worked in industry and I'd built systems where the business expert was able to read the programs because I'd used his or her language that they were using in their discussions as the actual programming language. So that I was trying to minimize that gap between business language and programming. And so I knew I could have a go at cracking on this. And so I said, yes, I can do that. 3 months. That's great. And my contract was also about to expire. So I was about to go back to industry. And I had my first meeting, and I was already thinking it was quite ambitious to try and build something that could be a prototype for being used by children. I never worked with children or education software before. And in the first meeting, I got a real sort of smack in the face because they didn't just want me to build a prototype in 3 months. They wanted me to build an actual, fully fledged, usable product. They wanted me to
Wow.
also go to a school to collaborate with a teacher, to teach with this product, to also then develop a curriculum which was associated with the new computer science curriculum, and to teach with it and to then assess and evaluate that teaching. It's all in 3 months.
3 month timeline.
Yeah, and I'd never
Wow.
developed with the Raspberry Pi. I mean, I'd only seen them. Like I've held one in my hand. So yeah, so I did what I could only do, which was to build the simplest possible system I could build, which could get me started. So the first version of Sonic Pi took 2 weeks, and it was the minimalist, simplest thing you could possibly. It just did a beep. I mean, actually, when you described at the beginning of this podcast, you said play 80. That's what it did,
Right.
and then you could sync for a second, and then you could play 85, and that's all it did. Very simple beeps. The timing was atrocious, but that was okay because we weren't making professional music. It didn't have. It had a few different kinds of sounds, but didn't have any samples or effects. Certainly, no ability to plug in guitars or to live perform or any of the good stuff you can do today. Um, but yeah, I mean that was enough to get started. I found a fabulous teacher. Her name was Carrie Ann Philbin, and she was really essential to the success of the project because she was really open to collaborating and running everything at the last possible minute because that's all we had. We sat down in the morning, so I got the 5:30 train from Cambridge down to Dagenham in London, took a taxi across London, and sat in her classroom at 8:30 in the morning and said, "Right, what are we going to teach today?" And so we planned the lesson, and then at like 9:30 we delivered the lesson. Then after the lesson, we had an evaluation chat and said, how did that go? What worked, what didn't work? And then we said, what should we do next week? And then that became the feature list of the next build, so that I would then build a new version of Sonic Pi for the next week, and then we would teach with that. So every week, children were using the bleeding edge development release.
They're your testers.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
I mean, and then after that 3 months process, the Raspberry Pi Foundation really appreciated, I think, and saw the value of Sonic Pi, and then started funding it more directly. Although wasn't dribs and drabs, there was no sort of here's 3 years worth of funding. It was always like here's another month, here's another 2 months, here's another month, and but that persisted for quite a while, which allowed me to really continue developing it. Although everything was a bit short sighted because it was always my last month, I know, so I was like, okay, what can I do in this month? There was no real long-term vision, which in many ways I think benefited because it meant that Sonic Pi were always kept working. There was never a sort of a 6 month period where I was in some sort of transition phase to a next glorious version because I didn't ever have that luxury of a 6 month period.
Okay. Going back to Carrie Ann there, because obviously Carrie Ann became quite big in the Raspberry Pi community, and was that her first exposure to the Pi? Was she involved, or was it just a teacher that you went along?
She was a teacher at the school, yes, and she was already, I think, very involved in the Python communities in London, so the user groups. So she was friends with somebody who worked at the computer labs. They're now married, and so that was. I think that was because of that introduction, I was able to be aware of Carrie Ann. But at that time, she was just a teacher. She was a fabulous teacher. I say just a teacher. She was a fabulous teacher. and she had ability to control, and the children had such respect of her that it made it joyful to be in those classes and to work with her. So yeah, so that was great. But yes, but after that point, then I think she was much more interested in working at a higher level in terms of education rather than directly sort of with the schools, and so she's now doing really fabulous work at the Raspberry Pi Foundation.
Yeah. So it's interesting, really. I suppose you have that one moment of this sort of memo or whatever dropping on your desk, this email, whatever, we'd like some assistance. Are you interested? And would you say that moment effectively change your life or change your career?
That's a very good question. I would say no. I think that it provided a great boost. I think it gave me an opportunity that sort of catalyzed it. But I would already at that point had been working on music programming language systems for quite a number of years at that point already. So maybe then it would, if that hadn't have been on my desk, I would have done it much more at a background process, more of a hobby at some points. But really, I remember having an interview, one of these sort of what are they called? Four window interviews, like a business thing, where you look at the past, present, and future, and now, and of what you want to do. And with my manager when I was working in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and he said, "What do you imagine yourself? What would you love to be able to do in the future?" And I said, "Well, I'd love to be able to go back and be in a sort of university-like environment and to be making music systems with code." And he looked at me and he sort of spat out with laughter, like a spit hit my face. Yeah, but that
Never.
obviously that became true. So
Yeah.
I had a self belief that I was able to do it somehow. So I think that this opportunity really made that much easier. But I think I would have found another way somehow.
Right. Right. And is this so going back to a younger Sam, computing and that, is that something you picked up from a young age, from an early
Yeah,
age?
I mean, right early on, I had access to a ZX Spectrum 48K,
Oh,
which
lovely.
was huge fun, like little rubbery keys. And the first
Yeah.
thing it does is invites you to write a program. You can't play a game unless you write 10 load, quote, quote. So, and then that had something very much like Sonic Pi. You could write basic melodies. So I remember programming it to play English Country Garden, I think it was, and to draw a house.
Brilliant. Okay.
And so that was just joyful at the time. So I think that initial experience of how, and I mean, my parents couldn't program. No one in my family had any technical skills at all.
No.
So the
No.
Spectrum and the manual was sufficiently simple and low barrier to entry to allow a small child who could read to do all that programming. And I think we've lost that today in many ways. And things are much more complicated and much more closed down. And to open up a shell essentially to write your own code is much harder. And so I wanted to address all those issues with Sonic Pi. And I feel I've done a pretty good job. And that's, to me, is one of the most beautiful things, as you described earlier. It's just that the getting from nothing to something being really simple and also being rewarding is really, I think, part of the sort of the goal of the experience, certainly the initial experience of Sonic Pi. And I never want that to stop. I want people to be rewarded. The more effort they put into learning how to do new things, for that to them give them more expressive power. And that's no different from a piano or a guitar, where
Absolutely.
anyone can walk up to a piano and play any of the notes, right? It's dead easy. You just bash your hand on the keys. And then, we haven't got the equivalent of a piano in programming. There isn't a thing where you can just walk up and program, you know? And so what you can go and anyone can make music on a piano. It might not be music they want to listen to or the people want to listen to, but they could certainly start. And then you want to have two other things. You want to have other people who can make virtuosic music. And so you look at that person, wow, like Jimi Hendrix, and say, wow, what is that wooden medallion around his neck? I want to be able to play that thing. Oh, it's a guitar. Okay, I need to learn that. So you need these virtuosic people who can show you what's possible, and obviously you need a range of people, and you need those people to have to be a very diverse set of people. So you can find people like yourself who are expressing themselves in ways that you would like to be able to express yourself. And then once you found that person, the third thing is you need a learning pathway to get you from where you are to where they are. That's not doesn't rely on you having some extraordinary skills that only a few number of people in the world potentially have. And so that's what I'm trying to do with Sonic Pi is to have that initial experience, to be able to foster a community, a diverse community of virtuosic Sonic Pi performers from a range of different styles of music, and then to try my best to find ways to support people towards that goal from nothing to virtuosic performances.
Yeah, and I see that enthusiasm from yourself in your Twitter timeline, where you'll be talking to people at whatever level. You'll see someone who's done that first attempt at doing something to someone who's done something pretty mind blowing. And I think I've seen a few times you going, "Wow, this was brilliant," astonished by what they've managed to achieve.
Indeed.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and it's brilliant that it's encouraging those people effectively, isn't it? Whatever level, just have a go at it and then learn along the way. It's brilliant, and it's something that consumes your time. I assume. I mean, how many hours a day? I mean, you're working. So you're now working freelance. You were funded initially by the Raspberry Pi Foundation.
Yes, I mean they donated the money to the University of Cambridge, yeah, and then that money stopped. And since then, I've been desperately finding. So that then at that point, development of Sonic Pi pretty much stopped too, because then I switched from a beautiful position where I could spend my time thinking about new ideas, collaborating with new people, and developing it in a way that I allow me to build the best software I've ever built in my life. Really, that freedom without having to worry about where's the money coming in. And then suddenly, I was thinking about how do I feed my family. And so that then obviously shifted my focus quite considerably. Um, so yes, sorry, I've lost the question now. I apologise.
Well, it's really just to sort of talk about that change. I mean, it's an interesting moment in time, isn't it? You've had some funding. That funding stops. You've then got to make a decision. You've got, as you say, you've got to feed the family. How do you achieve that? You've got this passion. You probably want to keep doing that, keep that going, but it's got to pay the bills. How what was that moment like? How did you overcome that problem?
Oh, it's very difficult, and it's not just an individual point in time. It's a long battle, really. It's not just a battle with yourself. Is it? Is it? Am I just being really self-centered and have too much self-belief, and really this project needs to come to a stop, and actually all this thought you've got of it being something important is just you being uh, just self-referential far too much. um, Versus actually there is value in this, and people are it is changing people's lives, because I kept getting emails and messages saying, oh, thanks to Sonic Pi I'm now a programmer, or Sonic Pi is changing my lives in these variety of different ways, or just people just having a lot of fun with it and seeing all the smiling faces all over the world, and so many different countries. So seeing that as well, thinking, okay, there must be value about this. But there was a bus drove from Finland to Africa, and I think it was 13 different African countries, and taught over 2,000 African women how to code using Sonic Pi. And I got to meet a number of other delegates from these different countries in Finland and Helsinki a few years ago, and the hugs I got were just so utterly beautiful and real. And so this was like, okay, this really is an important thing that I'm doing, and has a chance of really having a positive impact in the world. Um, so yeah, so figuring all that out, also versus trying to convince my family that this was a good idea, because obviously they want a reliable income. And I'm saying,
Yeah.
I mean, this conversation not even just with the family. It's I obviously had to create a financial vehicle essentially to do this. So previously, the financial vehicle was the University of Cambridge, and they paid me a salary. And then now I had to create a company. And so I was on the phone to the bank, and the bank is saying, okay, can you explain to me about your company and how you're making money, and what is the business
Yeah.
plan? And I'm like, well, I make this software which I give away for free. And
Yeah.
some
I can
people
imagine
donate
the
me some money
puzzled
now and then, and
faces.
people hire me occasionally to give talks and performances, but it's like sporadic, and there's no like once a month or anything like this. So I mean, if I was buying apples and then chocolate and then combining them to make chocolate apples, I think that's a conversation they would understand much better, because like, how much do your apples cost? How much do your chocolate cost? How much are you selling them for? How many are you producing per week? Okay, there's a business plan. So I think it took them quite a while to actually give me this bank account because I probably sounded quite dodgy.
They're
So
just trying
there
to
was,
grasp it at the other end of the
yeah,
line, aren't they? Going, what the heck
so
is all this about?
exactly. So I was trying to basically describe this. There was friction everywhere, really, about this about doing this, and so it was hard to convince. So personal friction, family friction, financial friction, social friction, commercial friction, and so it's figuring out all the pieces to put them together. And the thing that really made it possible were two real things. One which was Patreon, which is a website which is seeing more and more use now. I think, especially now we've got this virus situation going on, where people, where rather than like a Kickstarter, because another approach would be to create a Kickstarter and say, I'm going to produce some assets or some things. Please, could you put some money towards that so that I can build that. That's designed sort of for a one-off. Here's a pool of money to do your thing. Whereas Patreon is people saying, I really like what you're doing. I would like to support it. Here's $5 a month, which is the equivalent of a cup of coffee. So I'll give you, Sam, a cup of coffee every month. And I'm like, cheers, thanks. Then if a sufficient number of people give me a cup of coffee every month, that's a lot of coffees. Then I can start to buy cakes. Then I can start to buy shoes. And, and so it all adds
Yeah.
up. And so Patreon slowly started increasing, and it's at a level now where it's paying for about 50% of my income, which is amazing. So that was a critical thing, and that's not just a one-off payment. As I said before, that's a recurring every month, so I can rely on it. And actually, it's more reliable than many jobs because I can't suddenly get fired. Whereas certainly, like in America or countries where it's possible to fire people instantaneously, yeah, it would be the case of a slow degradation in support. It's not just going to disappear overnight. And then additionally, once I started telling organizations that I am no longer, I don't have a salary anymore, I then started charging for my talks and performances. And so that then turned into an income as well in its own right. So I went around the world
And
performing,
were people
talking.
resistant to that? People you'd were they resistant to that though? Because I know
Um,
you went out and did lots of things before that. So
yeah,
suddenly you go, no, actually now I need to. I've got to charge you for this.
yeah. I mean, some people it didn't work out, and understandably, and some people it did. And then it also as the performances I did, the venues increased in size. That increased the awareness of what I did, and so there were more people then off the back of those inviting me to more things. So it turned out to actually sort of snowball itself larger and larger, which was great, into a point where those talks and performances earned the other 50% of my salary.
Yeah. So okay. So obviously you've got that ability to go and perform. But obviously, we're living in very different times. We've got now the outbreak of COVID-19 that it's impacted me significantly. How does that impact yourself, Sam?
Yeah, so as I say before, that the my income currently is generated 50% from donations on Patreon and 50% from performances at conferences and events and internal company uh, parties and gigs, and obviously that's all gone at the moment, which is obviously nice from one perspective. That means I can stay at home more and be with my family more, which is great. But obviously that I need to find ways to replace that income. And I think actually from a open source developer perspective, it's really a sort of become a catalyst to the kind of thinking that I was leaning towards, but I had to do obviously have to do much earlier now, which is figuring out ways to diversify my income streams so that I'm not reliant. I mean, previously I was reliant on a whole funder, and when that stopped, that was a dramatic impact, and really was something that could have had a very high chance of killing the whole project. And so moving to two different income streams, Patreon and performances, has helped that significantly. And I mean, I was able to earn enough last year via the performances that I have some emergency funds in the bank, which are now paying for this sort of period where I'm getting less, which is great. And I certainly I couldn't have carried on without having that emergency funds from my family perspective, because it's important for them to know that because the events were coming in sporadically. It's like, what happens when you've got a period of 6 months with no events, Sam? It's like, oh, I need to make sure I've got enough money to save for that. And obviously that's the situation we're in now. So that's lucky. But yeah, it's to figure out to diversify even further. So I'm looking at approaches, like for example, to make videos that are tutorial videos that people can use
Hmm.
to get
Oh,
started
cool.
and to sell those. And then also there's this everyone's zooming each other all the time now, and Microsoft Teamsing everywhere, and so figuring out ways I can jump onto that. And find ways that I can then do remote performances. I mean, I was already thinking about this ahead of time because of the global warming issues, and I wanted to travel less, really, ultimately. And so back in my garden, I've already built a home studio for doing performances with a dedicated Ethernet cable and 4K cameras and lighting and all that stuff. Basically all the money I made, I invested in this equipment to help me then prepare for this future where I'm not flying as much, which obviously has come much sooner than I expected. So actually, it turns out that I'm in a pretty good position now to start doing quite fancy performances directly from my home. So I can sort of put my kids to bed, come out to the studio and do a rave, and then have a cup of tea and go to bed.
Yeah,
So
brilliant.
so that's
That's
just
it.
starting now. So I did a performance a couple of nights ago in a virtual reality environment in Italy. Um,
Okay,
2 weeks before that, I did a set of performances for a Rust conference that was being hosted from Germany. And there's a few other things I'm discussing and negotiating right now with other organizations and conferences, which may or may not happen. But I'm excited to see the potential of what I can deliver directly from my home.
brilliant. Yeah, I suppose you had your COVID moment a few years ago in a way where you kind of the income stream was stopping, and then it was like, what next? You've gone through that, and now you've got ways of adapting, and you're adapting very
Absolutely,
quickly with
yeah.
this real lockdown. Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean,
great.
yeah,
It's
I never thought about it that way, but that's absolutely right. I mean, and also I
yeah,
mean, that even comes down to the fact that I've been at home pretty much full time since that
yeah,
period. So yes, I've already been I self isolating. I mean, except for the travel, right?
yeah,
So when I was at
yeah.
home, I'll be at pretty much home full time, and then I'll be traveling quite a lot. Last year, I traveled an awful lot, too much really. But I had to say yes to everything to be able to
Get
bring enough
yourself in
money
this
in.
position.
Yeah, exactly. That I
Yeah.
can actually be safer now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm in a similar position where I took on board a lot of work in the last couple of years, a lot of projects, and that's allowed me, and to be in a position now, like you say, where a little bit saved up, giving me a bit of a safety net.
Yeah.
But
Does
it's
your
now
work
looking at the net.
require you to be like on site, on premises?
A mix. So I work direct with a lot of companies. So I say, okay, I'll be coming on board. There might be something that needs physical interaction. Um, Windows 10, for example, I may be building some laptops. We have to be there, do that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
then, but the testing, the initial work can be done at home. And so I tend to be sort of 80% at home.
Okay.
But it's just projects suddenly they're not crucial at the moment. So for me, they're on hold and I'm waiting. So I'm just kind of the safety net of cash is holding is keeping things going. But it's about, as you say, it's the what next really. So you're putting yourself in that position already and you're doing that. That's great. I need to do a bit more of that now.
I think
So
we
that's
all need to
where
do that. I think we need to do that not just individually, but I think companies need to do that. 'Cause I think we're going to see, already have started to see, a large number of companies fold. And I think many of them have been living on the edge of making sure that the supply coming in is just enough to pay for all the bills, to pay for all the salary for all the employees, to pay for the rent of the building, etc. And they've always been living on the edge. And then suddenly, when when things don't work in the same way,
yeah,
they haven't got that sort of war chest of
totally.
either of safety net, or they haven't got a diverse enough income stream that they can just switch across to other income streams and emphasize those, and the ones which are suffering right now they can put into sort of a sleep like state. So that's what as an open source developer, that's what I'm starting to see now. Is actually no one could have predicted really. Well, people have predicted there's going to be a virus that's spreading around the world, but no one knew it was going to be this year. And so I think you can't predict which of your income streams are going to be reliable or not. And so having more of them and being able to switch between them, I think is actually a really sustainable stance to take.
Yeah, you're in a good position. Hopefully, you've already got that flowing now, and hopefully that will continue for you. I'm at the start, so I've got to kick that in and get that moving. But the businesses that we're seeing going now are the ones that were going to go anyway. Really, I think at this stage, there's your Debenhams, that sort of thing that were
Yeah,
being propped up, yeah, and they wouldn't have lasted really much longer. Flybe, I think, probably is another good example. But it's challenging times, and for you as a family, I suppose we're all in the lockdown together. I've been talking on the podcast to a lot of people in the States, so I pretty much know how you're having to self isolate in the UK.
yeah.
But as a family, you've got young children.
I got three young
Uh,
children. Yeah,
yeah.
one who's just third birthday yesterday. My youngest, a 5 year
Oh,
old.
really? Oh,
Yeah.
it's my third boy's birthday yesterday as well.
Oh, nice.
He's
And
just
a
turned
7 year old as
15.
well. Oh, cool.
Yeah, yeah. So, but I mean, my boys and my daughter, they pretty much self isolate in their rooms on computers all the time. So,
Right.
um,
So they're probably
I
happy
can.
right now.
God, yeah, perfect for them. And the only time they come out of the room is when the router gets bounced or something. Like, what the hell's happened?
Yeah.
Um, but for younger children, it's they've got no idea really of they can't grasp it, can they? They don't know what's going on. But you've also got to exercise them. They've got to entertain them. So how do you achieve that with the young ones?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it turned out to be pretty resilient to change, and are able to adapt pretty well. I've been really surprised by their ability to adapt to those changing situations. So that's a positive from that perspective. Um, One of them actually is really happy to be at home. Didn't really enjoy school that much anyway, and so it's actually being with the family has made him much happier than not that he has ever been. But he seems really positive from that perspective. From an exercise thing, we've got a tiny garden, but we do have a trampoline in it, so they bounce around in that a
Perfect.
lot. And then our neighbour, who's got is a adjacent garden in terrace houses. So these are our house is 3 meters wide. So they're like a whole street of these very thin houses. Our neighbours doesn't use his garden very much and has kindly loaned the use of his garden to our children. So we bought and built a climbing frame and shoved it in
Oh,
that.
brilliant.
So the kids will be able to run around on this climbing frame and slide and jump around the trampoline. And then of course we have our one trip out a day. So they're actually currently now having a quick walk along the river, and they'll come back again. So we try to do some of that, and then we also try to do exercise in the morning, but that soon died down. Yeah,
Was that the Joe Wicks
yeah.
YouTube experience?
There's a
Was it?
point where I did a bunny jump onto my daughter's hand as she was like sliding around the floor, not paying attention. When I was like, okay, this is probably not working. And my son was just sitting on the sofa going, "Oh, this is rubbish." So and
That
only
was
the
showing
parents were
my,
doing it, and it was like for me, it was great because like I don't do enough exercise anyway. So like, yeah, okay, I'll do some kung fu kicks. That's fine.
yeah, just embarrassing them, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Embarrassing.
Part of
Yeah.
that. So don't stop this. I showed my daughter Tony Britt. I think there was the BBC archive was showing some of
Oh,
his
he's brilliant. That guy.
the
Okay.
fitness things
Okay.
from the
Yeah.
eighties.
It's
That's
short.
it.
Short.
Yeah. So I was saying this is what I did when I woke up, and my daughter's just rolling her eyes at me, going, "Yeah, all right, Dad.
Yeah. That's it.
Um,
That's it. Okay.
that's it. Yeah, it's good fun."
Lovely.
And you're a bit of a cyclist, aren't you? But not a cyclist as in lycra and shooting around the place. But you enjoy cycling. You don't have a car.
I don't have a car
Uh,
or a driving license. No. And yeah, I made. I mean, obviously now it's different because I'm self-employed. But I made a commitment to myself that I wouldn't get a job unless I could either cycle directly to the job or get a train and then cycle the rest. And yeah, I cycle everywhere. I do my shopping on my bike. I cycle whenever I need to go to, if I want to go to the train station, or I go for long cycle rides for exercise and just for joy. I mean, it's the closest thing I've got to flying, really, real flying, because you're kind of flying through the air at
mm,
great speed on this amazing contraption that you're controlling. It's just wonderful. And I used to live in the Netherlands as well, so I have a I have an understanding. I mean, I actually also, luckily, over the last couple of years, I've had quite a lot of jobs in the Netherlands as well. And so I'd always take a very early flight and get there early, hire a bike, and then just cycle out into the countryside. It's just glorious because everywhere there are cycle paths. And um, my my technique was always to figure out how long I'd have for a trip. So say it's like 4 hours or something. Then I would then cycle for 2 hours. And every time I came to a junction, because obviously there's a whole network of cycle paths in the Netherlands,
Mm.
it's amazing. You can cycle across the whole country on these paths. So every time I get to a
Wow.
junction, I would look both ways and just see which one looks most attractive and go that way. Just that way, just randomly just cycle around until the 2 hours had elapsed, and then I would then head back to Amsterdam. And the way to do that is just the signposts everywhere. It's amazing. So you just follow the signposts back to Amsterdam, and then you're good. So that was
Brilliant. So
my tip.
you're never really getting lost. Initially, you're following your nose, just picking a route and going, "Oh, this looks nice,"
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
then you can get your way back without any problem.
It's amazing, and you'd have to worry because I tried. I lived in the Netherlands for a few years and then moved to Cambridge, and I was so used to doing that kind of thing. I did it over here, and I ended up in the middle of somehow in the middle of a refuse depot which I shouldn't have been in because I've gone
Yeah.
behind some path. I was pushing my bike along a grass at some point, and
Mm.
then I found a road, but it was like an A road, which is a very very busy road with no
Oh
cycle
God.
lanes, no public footpaths, and absolute tons of massive trucks. And so I
Oh
had to
no.
cycle
Yeah.
along this road, and people were like beeping the horn at me, and it's like I don't
Yeah.
know what to. I couldn't do anything else. There was
Yeah.
actually, unless someone had a truck who could come and pick me up, that was the only way to get home. So that really put me off
Yeah. And
the
you're
random
fearing for your
cycling
life.
approach. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's how, I really wish more countries took the Dutch approach and built more cycling infrastructure. It'd be amazing.
Yeah. The first time I did London to Brighton, so we were raising money for a girl, and we set off from the outskirts of Kent and took it. It wasn't the usual London to Brighton route that everyone does from kind of southwest London, and
Sure.
we came in through Lewis in Sussex, and then we got down to effectively sort of 8 miles out of Brighton, where we had to go from east to west, and we were on a dual carriageway. It was absolutely awful. We were on the bit at the side there, more or less the hard shoulder. It was a big A road, and that was just, I was fearing for my life. It
Terrifying.
was
Yeah.
awful. It was just, God, can we get off this? And you have no option. And I was thinking, did we not plan this? It was somebody had driven it. I thought surely they would have just gone, actually, that looks a bit dodgy. But when you're in a car, you don't think of it in those
No,
terms
not
at
at
all.
all. No.
And it was like, okay, so the next time I do London to Brighton, I'll do it in a more sensible route, which was the kind of official route and
Sustrans.
country lanes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I've grabbed the bike this week. It's I tended to commute to into London, which again people go, why do you do that? That's a death trap. But the cars aren't going that quick, so really you're fairly safe. It's there's a bit of weaving and bobbing. I've had a few incidents over the years, but speed wise they're not going 50, 60 miles an hour, so you feel less threatened by that.
Sure.
Um, but I've dragged the bike out because it's like, okay, I did the Tour de Yorkshire last year with my eldest, 80 miles, and I really didn't train that much for it, even though I'd done quite a bit of cycling. But my knees, oh my god, my knees had gone about 40 miles into it, and I'm hitting 50 next year, and I thought,
Yeah.
is this old age or is this lack of practice? And I remember,
Both probably.
yeah, absolutely. And I stayed at my mum's that night after doing it, and I just couldn't turn in bed. When you kind of do your shouldering and you're like trying to turn, but trying to move your legs when neither of them were operating. I had to lift my leg up with both arms to move it
Crikey.
round just to turn. And I thought, how the heck am I going to drive home? And I've done one more cycle since then. I was in the Alps at the summer and we went out. I went out on a cycle just up a hill and back down again, about 8 or 9 miles, and loved it. But I thought I've got to get back out. But it's always been, my knees have been great. Not since then, but I think it could be old age. I don't know. But I dragged it out last week. I thought, right, we have that one opportunity to go out and do something. And the weather's been lovely recently, hasn't it? So that's
Yeah, it's been
perfect.
amazing.
Yeah, and I went out. Just did a cycle around Greenwich, about 8 miles or so, and obviously there's less traffic, which is fantastic. So
Yeah.
it's lovely at the moment for that. So the knees were fine. It was just the backside. The next day I went back on, and I was like, oh my god, I've forgotten about this. Got to get used to this again.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
I love it. I mean, I remember starting cycling again. This was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and I hadn't done it for years. And it just felt like a kid again. Those moments of bombing it down a hill and that freedom, like you say, that it's almost like flight, isn't it? You've got the wind in your face and you're coasting down the hill and you're thinking, I'm going to be doing wheelies next. It's,
Stuff like that.
I don't think you grow out of that, do you?
No, I don't think so at all. And I think then when you've got an experience of cycling in the Netherlands where all the surfaces are just beautiful and immaculate and
Oh,
let you
yeah.
just whiz along super fast and there's no cars on the cycle paths, certainly out of the
Totally
city.
safe.
It's
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's just makes it more joyful. Really, you can really not have to, because in the UK when you're cycling, you have to constantly have a person in the back of your head saying, "Are you going to kill me? Is this car going to kill me? Am I going to die here?" Otherwise, yeah, you're not safe. You have to always ask that question. And in the Netherlands, you can sort of switch that person off a little bit, turn them down a bit more, and increase the fun.
Yeah. As I say, driving cycling into London, it has its moments. It's, as you can imagine, it's busy, busy traffic, and I've got whiplash because about 5 years ago I cycled into the back of a transit van because I wasn't
Oh
looking
no!
as I went through some lights, and the lights were fine on green, but the cars ahead of me had stopped, and I hadn't seen that, so I'm popping the brakes on, bang, I hit the back of this transit van. I'm expecting the guy to come out and go, roar. He just set off. He didn't have a clue. And I'm stood there going, what's happened? So I
Oh
dragged
no!
myself to the side and thought, that'll be a bit sore for a week or two. And I still suffer from it now.
Wow!
It's just one of those things, but, it's being aware and that. And I've been over a bonnet of a car as well. But I will promote it. I still will do it and I still love it. And I'd much rather, although, as I say, in the last year I haven't done much, but I'd much rather cycle into London than push myself into a packed tube or a
Oh,
packed
every
train.
day. Yeah.
Yeah, even those days when it's chucking it down with rain, and I cycle past the bus stop at the top of the road, and I see everyone stood there all miserable. And I'm thinking, I'm on the move now,
Yeah. Yeah.
and by the time your bus comes in 10 minutes, I'm going to be a third of the way into my journey, almost there. As long as I've got a shower at the other end or whatever.
Yeah.
So
And
it's something,
adequate clothing.
yeah. There's some places I've been to where they don't have the facilities, and I'm like, I've got to put the stuff back on at the end of the day, and it's like slipping into a wetsuit, and it's like, oh, geez, it's horrible. No matter how dry the shoes go, they're not dry enough by the end of the day, and it's just like slipping on a wet pair of wellies. That bit's a bit rank, and you're thinking, my God, I bet I absolutely reek. But I'd still rather do that than cram myself into a tube for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Living life.
Definitely, definitely. So Sam, I'd like to go back to again to when you were younger then and the computing side of things.
Sure.
Um, Now you mentioned the Spectrum. So were you someone who was programming this stuff, or were you someone who would play games as well? Was it really the coding aspect that got you? And
No, I was mostly playing games on the Spectrum, to be honest.
right,
And
good to
I
hear.
Yeah, and I dabbled with the programming for fun and enjoyed it, but I reached a limit of what I could do pretty quickly. So the two major issues really were the fact that, well, the major issue, I had no one around me who could program, so I didn't really have anyone to bounce ideas off. And when things didn't work, as they never did, I never had anyone to help me through that moment. And I guess I didn't have enough self discipline at that young age to actually just keep going myself. And the other problem was that although there were really amazing magazines at the time, and there were at the back of the magazines there was always these long programs that you could type out, which would allow you to play your own games you've written yourself. Well, obviously they'd written the code, you were just typing it out, and they never blooming worked
No,
because there was always a typo in there somewhere,
yep,
and so it wasn't a case of, hey, you can code your own games. It's, hey, actually, what we're going to do is teach you how to debug your own games, and we're
yeah,
not even going to
yeah,
teach
yeah.
you that. You're going to leave that as a home project, and of course, that just led to frustration. So I never really got very far programming wise on the Spectrum because of that. And
Sometimes you
then,
get the next issue a month later. They might say, "Oh, here was the typo," but
yeah,
not
exactly. So
always.
you might have
Yeah,
typed it out perfectly, it still didn't work.
yeah.
Exactly.
You have to wait a
Um,
month for the answer.
Yeah, and also there's sometimes the really good games they would spread over a number of magazines, and sometimes you wouldn't
Oh
have like
God,
a
yeah.
third version of it and whatever. But yeah, then at school, so I kind of stopped at that point. And I was at primary school then, so I don't know 7, 8, something like this. And then at school when I was 13, yeah, I think about 12, 13. There we had it was at the same time the graphical calculators started becoming a thing. So these are like fancy graph calculators that just didn't do just the like the trigonometry functions, which like the scientific calculators did. These also had like a small display at the top that allowed you to plot a sine wave or tangent curve or whatever it was really to draw the shape or the highlight underneath a particular mathematical curve so you can calculate the area. It was basically trying to get you to do the sort of fancy trig functions, but in a visual way. And they looked really cool. So I managed to somehow get my mum to get in a position where we could get one of these things, which is great. And so I got one of these calculators. And then I soon learned, I did the thing where you read the manual because in those days, things came with a manual. It was amazing. You could
Mm,
actually read how the stuff worked rather than having to figure it out yourself. And
yeah.
um, and so I read the manual, and the back of the manual was, and we've made a very simple programming language for the calculator, which you can use to do your own functions with. Uh, and one of the functions was called plot, and you pass in an x, y coordinate and a color. There were three different colors, like orange, black, and blue, I think. And so essentially, you could draw your own pictures by calling plot a load of times to draw all the different pixels. And so once I discovered that, that was it. I was no turning back. And I quickly figured out how to. I was then thinking, oh, okay, the sine wave is pretty fun. But really, what I want to draw is the Mandelbrot set. That's way cooler. So I then figured out the maths and figured out how to calculate, to do the programming to get the calculator to draw me the Mandelbrot set, which obviously took, I think, like 4 hours for it to render, I don't know, 32 by 32 pixels, something stupidly small, low res. And then I would like choose an area and zoom in into that and wait another 4 hours for that particular thing to draw. And so that was fun. And then I got it
But this is
to
4 hours, though.
do
You say you sort of type it in and then you wait for the thing to process
Yeah,
effectively.
because
Yeah.
you had to draw the Mandelbrot set, you've got to iterate through the x y coordinates to the imaginary space, and then see if it actually terminates or not. And then at the point which it terminates or doesn't terminate, you then draw the color. So it's got to do an iterative function for every single pixel, and the calculator was super slow, so it was just it was much yeah. I mean, on a modern architecture, you could do this in real time and zoom in infinitely and all amazing stuff because you're using the graphics card often for that kind of stuff. But yeah, this was a very, very, very crappy processor, not really designed for this. Doing this, and maybe I'm sure if I went back and found the source code of what I'd written, it was probably extremely inefficient because I had no idea about
Yeah.
algorithmic complexity or anything like that. So there's probably a combination of slow processor and crappy code.
But you
But then
had the
I,
patience to wait for that
yeah,
amount of time, to wait for
of
it to
course,
happen, and then these days you'd be like, move on.
yeah,
Things
yeah,
would happen.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I guess at that point I got a bit more disciplined, and then I then soon then thought, well, what else can I do with this? So I made a text adventure game, with which you could had different rooms and keys you could take from chests and open a door, and I built my own little sort of mine. What's it called? There's a game where you can it gives you like a bunch of numbers, like four numbers, and then you make a guess, and it tells you how many numbers you've got in the right
Oh,
place and how many numbers you've got
Minesweeper.
in the wrong place.
Yeah,
Minesweeper, yeah,
Minesweeper.
Mastermind, Mastermind.
Yeah.
Minesweeper. Minesweeper.
Oh, okay,
Anyway, yeah,
Mastermind. Right. Okay.
yeah. I can't remember. Yeah. So anyway, it's just like a puzzle game. So I built that as part of it. So once you answer the puzzle correctly and got the it generated a random key and you got the right key, then you're able to then get the key, the actual physical key. Well, it's obviously virtual. And then take it to a room and open up another lock and whatever. So that was fun to do. And then I got worms racing across the screen with different probabilities. You can bet on them. Um, and then I made tanks. So I plotted like a random sort of sine wave kind of thing, and then put the tanks on top of them and did the graph of underneath it, and that was the hills. And then you could choose the angle, the velocity, and they would plot the little sort of cannons being fired and then see if it hit the other tank. So I would be playing at school with my mates. We'd be playing, and with teachers would be thinking we'd be doing maths, but we were playing tank games.
Brilliant.
I did Tetris. And
Okay.
eventually, I also did like a really shitty, crappy version of Pac-Man because I reached the point where the code I was writing just really wasn't able to run on the hardware. So I had the E symbol was a Pac-Man, and I had like I think two ghosts. That's all it could handle, and it would plot the whole map, and then the next frame, and then the next frame. So it was super slow, but you could walk around this map and eat the full stops, which are the pills, and so that at that point, then we had in our school we had one computer connected to the internet, and I
Right.
used I think it was Alta Vista to do a search. It's like I
Oh
suddenly had
God.
this
Yeah.
internet available to me. Like, what would you search like on the internet? What would be the thing? What would be the question you could ask this oracle of all knowledge? And so my question was, who else is making crazy games for the Casio, whatever it was,
Right.
calculator? And there were a few other people who put their code up. None of them were exciting as mine. So I thought, okay, maybe programming is my thing.
Yeah.
And so then I applied to university to do programming. So then, yeah, that's the rest of the story.
Okay. So this is the mid 90s then, I assume, is it? If it's Alta Vista.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was born
And
in
so you went
79.
off to university. Yeah. You got accepted for something.
Computer science. Yeah.
Computer
Newcastle
science. Where
University.
where did you go, Sam?
Newcastle. So
Oh, did
northeast.
you? Okay. Right. I went to Sunderland, so we're
Oh, nice.
northeast. I was there in the early 90s for that, so I had a great time up there. Bloody cold, but great,
Yeah, it was
great time.
cold. Very cold. Windy and cold and wet a lot as
Windy and
well.
cold, but you experienced the big market on a weekend and things like that, or did you shy away from
I
that?
actually lived. I lived just down the road from there for a couple of years on the quayside. That was crazy. So I didn't need a television. We would just sit outside, look out the windows, and look at all the crazy people having their parties, and that
Oh
was enough
God, yeah.
entertainment. Yeah,
Watch the characters go by.
yeah,
God.
yeah, remarkable. There's a person dressed as a bunny rabbit. Yeah,
And did they have was it the Tuxedo Royale boat? Was that
yeah,
still there at the
yeah. There was two
quayside back
versions
in
of
that
that boat. Yeah, that was opposite from where we lived, and that was famous for having foam parties and also a
yeah
revolving dance floor. Which
revolving dance
when you
floor? Yeah,
combine that with the fact that everyone was obviously inebriated, and the boat was also at an angle, everyone was
yeah,
falling over. I think I only went there once because it was horrendous, and
yeah.
it really didn't smell very nice. But yeah, everyone was just slipping over the foam on the dance floor, and it was because it was also at an angle. It was just it was a. I think some people really liked that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So, did you experience the nightlife of Newcastle much? Were you going to concerts and gigs? What's your kind of musical taste? I assume it's based around the stuff that you're kind of programming.
Yeah, well, so I wasn't programming music at that point. I was did my undergraduate and PhD there. My PhD was in language design, but not really anything to do with music. Um, I did a lot of the sort of pub life, and I did a lot of long conversations with friends over pints. There was a really nice pub called the Free Trade, which is on the river in Newcastle, where you get to look up at the whole of the quayside, and that was a really nice location and really nice to watch the Gateshead Millennium Bridge being built from there, and that was nice. And we also had I had like a little pub crawl we would do along the Ousburn Valley. And end up in a place called the Cluny, which is also a really famous
Clooney.
gig venue. And that was nice
Yeah,
in the early days because they always used to have an art gallery in the Cluny itself. And so every time we would go, there'll be different art to look at, which is really nice. But then
mm,
they got bought out and that all went away. And yeah, there was like a graffiti wall on the toilets where you could like with chalkboards, so you could write messages to your mates who were going to go to the toilet next, and
right.
put, they put perspex over
Interesting
that
things,
and
I bet.
stopped people writing messages. Um, so that
I
all
bet.
stopped.
Yeah.
But yeah, but that so there was that, and there lots of deep conversations with friends, which was really nice. But then there was also like lots of weird arty things I'd start going to, and there was like be a bunch of what I would call the Art 50. So there's about 50 people I would recognize their faces, but not know who they were, and they would always be at the same events and same venues that I'd be at. And that was quite interesting. It's like I wish there was like a. I'm sure today there'd be some sort of WhatsApp group or something where we'd all like start to
Yeah.
meet each other and talk to each other. But then you just recognise the faces. And the music I was into at the time was it had migrated from rock music to very much experimental electronic music. So record labels like Warp. record labels and
Okay.
artists like Aphex Twin and Square Pusher.
Yeah.
So I would be going to those kinds of gigs. I remember there was an amazing boat called the Stubnitz, which is an old fishing trawler. I think it was a Russian fishing trawler that some German artists bought and then fitted out with the largest speakers known to mankind. And that came and docked at Newcastle, and Warp record labels put on a number of their artists, and that was just incredible. I saw a band called Pansonic play there, and the bass in that place reverberated like no one nothing I've ever heard before. That was really
Mm.
inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So Newcastle for us was a place where, because we were down the road in Sunderland, and now I believe they've got the metro link up goes all the way down. But for us, we
yeah,
used to
you can get
go
the
up.
metro. Yeah, single train.
Yeah, yeah, no, we had to get the train up, and We used to go to gigs at what was Newcastle Riverside, which I think finished around '99, that kind of time, and it was all the kind of uh, grungy bands, indie bands would play there. But we used to go along, and we could only stay for so long because the last
Get the
train was
train
about
back.
10 past
Oh
11.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, because we couldn't afford the taxi home. It was too much. So if we missed that train, it was, God, we've got to pay for this taxi now. So we would just stay as long as we could in the venue, hear as much as we could, but we could never really hear the encore. And we just have to
yeah,
peg it down the street as quickly as possible to get back.
yeah.
My friend of mine always goes on about how we went to see Nirvana at the Mayfair, and I tell him every time I wasn't there. I didn't go to it. I couldn't be bothered.
Oh
But yeah, I just missed it. I don't know why. I just didn't get a ticket for it. I saw the farm at Mayfair, which wasn't really a great substitute.
no,
Um,
the Mayfair had just
but
been knocked down by the time I got there. And I
yeah,
remember I was because you're obviously a tiny bit older than me. My physics teacher when I was at school showed us these tickets for Nirvana that he had, but they were obviously no longer going to perform there because Kurt sadly had died at that point. But there he was actually the die between him buying the tickets and the gig that was about to be played. So.
yeah, I think it's one of the claim to fames actually of the Riverside. So they've got three big claim, but they've got more than that. But three big claim to fames is that their first live appearance of Nirvana in the UK was there. They were played support.
Nice.
I'm not sure who to. And then they were featured on Oasis played there. I don't know if it was recorded, but it kicked off. I think someone threw something at Noel and Liam got a bit handy, and it ended up being completely. They just walked off stage and that. And also David Bowie played there
Oh, nice.
in about '96. So he played to about, I think it was 500 people max in the venue, but he was recommended it by, if I remember correctly, because I bought a book about Riverside, which is real good reading. I think it was maybe someone like Elvis Costello had recommended to him, go to this venue, it's great.
Right.
Because I think they used to use it as a place where bands would go after they'd played on the Tube back in the 80s as well. They'd go and play a few gigs there as well afterwards, sort of after party type thing.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but it was one of those venues that just brings back a lot of memories, and is another one of those that's gone. I think the Clooney's gone, but they've created a new Clooney, and so it's the same name but completely different venue now. And I think they might.
Are you talking about World Headquarters?
No, no,
Because that was a really cool nightclub I used to go to. They played really like 70s dance music and yeah, really good vibe. And that they knocked that down to make a bus route, and they rebuilt it a larger version. It never really had the same sort of
no.
atmosphere, which is a shame. It was just much bigger and more commercial than it was before.
Yeah, that's the thing. It spoils it, doesn't it? This kind of they rebuild these sort of things and they'll try, but it becomes more corporate or something like that. It
Yeah,
loses that originality. I mean, I just remember the Riverside, just sweat dripping off the ceiling, absolutely disgusting. But it was just that raw venue for gigs, and the Mayfair, was completely different. It was a completely different type of venue. But no, happy days, and I enjoyed my time up at the northeast. I've never been back since, so I was actually supposed to do some work up there about 2 years ago, and I thought, oh, I'll go and reminisce. But then when I did a bit of research, literally everything had gone, pub wise, club wise, all that
oh, it's changed
completely
dramatically.
changed.
Yes. Yeah, so
Yeah.
when I was there at university, there was massive change already. The quayside completely changed. I mean, a good film to watch is Get Carter, the original one, and you can see a completely different Newcastle than there's today.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. It was very run down, wasn't it? I mean, I was there, um, like I say, early '90s, and the whole landscape changed. Sunderland itself, the um, university moved from buildings around the town to a campus. So
Oh, right.
the whole side of things shifted there, and they regenerated this whole quayside area, and the same sort of things happened in Newcastle as well. Obviously, say the bridge being built, and obviously the Gateshead. Is it the Sage Centre? Is that right?
Yeah, the Sage, which is an amazing music hall, and also the Baltic Art Gallery, which is like kind of a Tate Modern of the North. It's fabulous as well.
Right. Okay. Well, Sam, we've been chatting for quite a while now, and it's been a real pleasure chatting to you today. I think it's nice that we reminisced a little bit there about areas that we've been to in the past. It's 30 odd years since I started going there, so it's
Yeah,
quite scary. But it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and it's a real pleasure to finally talk to you because we've never, as I said at the start, we've never had a conversation. We've spoken on Twitter and as
yep,
we've collaborated.
indeed.
So for people who want to know more about you, if they don't know about you at the moment, what are your handles out in social?
Sure. I mean, my name is Sam Aaron, and probably that's going to be on the podcast show
Yep.
notes. And my handle is Sam Aaron, as much as it can be in various places. So on Twitter, I'm Sam Aaron. That's AARON. Instagram, I'm Sam Aaron. And they're the main two places really. I'm posting and following things directly. LinkedIn, I guess, as well. I post things, but that's really often a copy of the things I put on either Twitter or Instagram.
Cool.
Um,
And the Twitter handle for Sonic Pi has got an underscore.
Yes, exactly. Sonic_pi as a mathematical
Yeah.
symbol.
I think there's someone who's already got Sonic Pi, haven't they? And they get weird and wonderful messages probably every now and again.
I
And they,
assume so. Yeah. I mean, I always quite like the space in there. It just makes it just clearly separates the words. So
yeah,
if I try and have either Sonic-pi or Sonic_pi, depending on what the symbols are allowed in, whatever it is. So the website is sonic-pi.net.
yeah.
Um,
It reminds me of the chap who's John Lewis on Twitter, and he's I'm not that John Lewis, but he kind of has a bit of fun about it and talks about.
in fact, it's not a
Oh,
large chain of shops.
yes, it's been an absolute pleasure, Sam. Thanks for joining me
Indeed.
on the Just a Couple of Jerks podcast, and I'll carry on doing those portable editions for you.
That's super kind of you. Thank
Real
you.
pleasure.
And yeah, and
Lovely.
if anyone else out there is interested in Sonic Pi and wants to find out more, the website is sonic-pi.net, as I've said before. But there's also a link on there to our really friendly community where you can come and meet teachers and artists and other programmers and ask any question. There's no wrong questions at all. There's the cool thing about music is there's no real mistakes, just opportunities. And so it's really just fun to experiment and then share your experiments with others. And if anyone is critical in a non-constructive way, then I'm down on them like a ton of bricks, and I try my best to try and keep things a nice a nice atmosphere, a nice friendly atmosphere that's positive for learning and sharing. So please do get involved and have fun. And if programming music isn't your thing, it might be someone else's that you're close to. And so just share the word and get more people being creative with code. I guess one of my most important messages is that well, people don't know what programming is at all in general, and those who do think they know what programming is typically think it's directly associated and correlated with business, which it currently is. And so I want to try and break that a bit and to get people to recognize and understand that code is not just for business. It's something that allows us to express ourselves just in the same way that reading and writing is not just something for business. We don't just read and write legal documents all day. Read and write poems and stories and just tweets and messages and shopping lists and loads of stuff we can do with reading and writing that isn't business specific. And I think that programming is yet to be discovered in that kind of free flowing expression and form. And society, once it starts to understand and recognize this, I think it will be transformed in ways that are yet to be imagined and hopefully aren't just negative, but are really beautiful too.
Yeah, definitely. That's really well put, and it's a beautiful little product. I really love messing around with it, and I urge not urge, but I definitely promote it when I speak to people, and I say check it out. It's great. It's brilliant, and it's great that you've poured so much of your time into it. So thanks again, Sam. Thanks for
Thank you so
joining,
much. You're very
and
welcome.
keep it up. Brilliant. Take
Brilliant.
care.
Bye.